Hi guys, my name is Baradante, and welcome to another episode of my reporting on my progress with video game development, or learning how to develop games, as well as the continuation of my talk, answering to some of the nightmare that happened in the comment section under the previous video. So first things first, meet my new testing character, whose name is texturing_humanbase.lp. Actually, the file is called Behemoth, so that may be it, although I don't think this would be enough for that kind of creature. But yeah, pretty much a very random thing that I ended up somewhat fully sculpting, but again, on a testing level, fully remeshing, preparing UV maps, fully texturing with a bunch of different materials, including stuff like photo textures, procedural textures, and all kinds of masks, and actual hand painting. And after that, I even ended up rigging it. Gotcha. With a pretty complex rig like this, with no effort whatsoever, and having all kinds of controls, which is pretty sweet. So this character is fully ready. It has 33,000 vertices, 3 8K textures, the rig that is fully compatible with Unreal Engine, and it's actually totally ready to be exported and used in a game. All of this I did in less than 8 hours, which is exactly the thing I was looking for and exactly what I spent a few weeks trying to figure out the pipeline for. To be able to create things quickly, efficiently, with no, stupid routine things, or as little of those as possible, and mostly focusing on, the design and how I want things to actually be, instead of doing something that's, just technical necessity. And yeah, things ended up really cool. I even have a picker right here, which is something I didn't even know I needed. So that's really cool, being able to quickly, select all the fingers, for instance, and stuff like that. Also, it fully supports facial animation, although this guy doesn't really need it. And all of this, to my surprise, the whole pipeline up to this point ended up being only in Blender, which I totally didn't expect to happen. So now I'll talk a bit more about this, and generally talk about the way things are, show you guys around a little bit with all these stages of how I did everything. So yeah, how I made this whole thing possible in Blender, I mean, it's generally possible in Blender in any case. Obviously, it wasn't using anything that's absolutely not available in the app, but combining that amount of textures on one model is really hard to do in Blender as it is. Not to mention doing all of this within like 8-hour time period and having this kind of retopology. I'll start from the beginning. I started with sculpting. So I got the basic human shape mesh. That's why it's called human base, because you just start with a human shape base and you just sculpt and do whatever you want with it. And this is the mesh I ended up getting in actual sculpting. So it was this kind of density. I was using Dintopo a lot. Pretty much everything was done with just the clay brush, like this basic clay brush. A crease brush that creates really nice folds. It's pretty much everyone's favorite sculpting brush usually. Maybe some snake hooks here and there were involved as well, so doing stuff like this. Obviously in here, right? And also a whole bunch of cloth brush, which is a really cool thing. I don't think I ever showed you guys on my channel what this brush does. It's a really cool thing, a relatively new thing in sculpting, but like most respectable sculpting apps have this feature now. So it's really cool, adds nice, realistic quality to the surfaces, introducing some kind of looks of certain materials to the sculpt. Like, it's not necessarily like this looks kind of weird. It doesn't look like skin. It looks like some kind of plastic wrapping around the body, but it doesn't matter. I kind of liked this combination of whether it's like skin or not. It kind of looked really cool to me. Again, nothing specific. I also applied that same cloth brush in here to introduce some kind of wrinkles that look kind of like expression on the face, but not really. So that was a lot of fun. A really cool thing, like if you don't know what to do with the design, cloth brush is the new tool in the technology of lazy sculpting. And so I got this mesh, Then the first plugin was used, and it's actually the most expensive plugin of all. I still haven't bought it, and I'm still hesitant, but it seems like this is the way, because this thing creates really awesome looking topology really fast. It created this kind of mesh, and this is like 25,000 polygons. Let's actually give it a try and remesh to something a lot smaller. I think when I put in 16,000, it makes 25,000. Let's put in like 3,000. Let's see what it does. It's kind of weird. You have to like bargain with it. Like you type in 16,000, it will make 25, almost if it can't make 16,000. But then if you type in 3,000, it may actually make 16,000. Like, why not just make 16,000 when I'm asking you to do it? But whatever. So yeah, it also, like, it may adapt quad count, it may adapt the size of polygons to make sure a certain curvature is repeated better because it's more dense in that part, like creating like faceting or beveling, whatever. So it makes it look like really good in that regard. So let's say I'll just run it with this 3000 quad count setting. So this plugin is really awesome. It's literally, it may sound familiar, Quad Remesher, because it's literally the plugin. Oh my god, that seems like 3,275. That's the same plugin from ZBrush. In ZBrush, you have that one-click remeshing solution, and that's Quad Remesher. It's the same algorithm from the same people on their website. You can download it for Maya, for ZBrush, or for Blender. So that's really cool. I think 30-day trial, and I'm still using it, still deciding, but I think this is the best thing you can get for Blender for sure, especially if you're not interested in being a modeler, but you just want things done, you know? Then definitely, look at that, it even made each finger pretty well. Like a bit inconsistent topology on each, but I mean, if you're going this low poly count, I guess you don't really care. But yeah, generally you can see how my mesh is asymmetrical, so I'm not using symmetry here. And that's like a big deal. You see, when it doesn't see symmetry, it starts doing like, well, no one would make a head mesh where you wouldn't have symmetry here, so it's kind of a weird thing. I'm not sure how exactly it works if I would tell it to do the symmetry, but the actual sculpt is not symmetrical. I want to actually give it a try. So symmetry, let's actually make 5,000, because 3,000 almost looks like boring a little bit. But actually that's kind of a cool thing because, you know, different levels of detail are necessary for games. So if you can quickly make a good mesh of 3,000 polygons, that's pretty useful as well. Okay, yeah, it makes the shape symmetrical, so it's just a fully symmetrical thing, and I'm not sure which side exactly it chooses, but I guess just one of them, right? Seems like this one, so his right-hand side becomes both sides. But generally, yeah, as you can see, like, if you choose symmetry, if you go with actually symmetrical shape. What I actually thought about recently, like, after I did the whole experiment with this character, is that you don't have to stop with just making one mesh and that's it. You can really make, for instance, this mesh being perfectly symmetrical, and you have most of the character defined perfectly symmetrically and, you know, really repeating your almost symmetrical sculpt. But then in here you have asymmetrical stuff, so you just remesh it again, and there you uncheck symmetry. And then you just stitch it together. It takes some time, but really it's a lot faster than doing it on your own, and you get pretty much like a perfect topology in the end. You know, it's gonna be actually symmetrical where it should be and asymmetrical where it shouldn't be. And another thing I thought about was very interesting, that I created this retopology and it's cool and all, like high detail and everything, but the part inside, right, of this whole wound part, like I've seen sculpts just decimated when the poly count becomes lower due to like triangulation, very messy kind of triangulation. And it's not good for animation, but it looks way better as a shape. It would repeat the original shapes way better with the same poly count, because it's not going for creating quads and perfect flows, but just going for repeating the shape really well. And inside of the wound, I really don't need it being perfect for animation, because animation is important in parts like elbows, you know, where you bend the character, you need to have these loops so they would compress properly. Because if there's random triangles, they'll start fighting each other very weirdly and creating weird spikes and holes everywhere. So that's why you need this kind of flow look. But inside of this thing, like, no one expects it to bend well or too much, so it's beneficial in here to go with decimation to have a better look of this geometry, because it's like, it's not about the way it moves here, it's about the way it looks. So by that I mean, like, if we go maybe even lower, 0.05 maybe, even less, 0.02, okay, maybe more, 0.04. I mean, this legit represents the sculpt better than, you know, this nice and smooth geometry. It's looking great when you look at the grid, but if you don't look at it, it's too smooth, you know? It's all rounded and it's quads, while this stuff really keeps those details around. And if anything, you can go even more detailed in here for in that regard, just to make sure this part looks as impressive as possible. But also it's useful because when you project normals on it, it will be as close as possible to the original geometry, so you'll have less problems and everything will project quicker. I actually had a problem that is not exactly fixed at the very end as well. In here you can see little bugs, like spots. That doesn't count, that's probably just my texturing. But this is like little things, because the walls are really close to each other, and when you project, it doesn't know what to do. It goes through each other and creates this weird nothing. So that's one problem that I ended up deciding not to do anything about it. Like, I tried to use a cage, but it messed up a little bit and I wasted more than 10 minutes on it, so that was a no-go for me. But yeah, I think if it would be decimated, it would be so much closer to the actual shape that you can go ahead and just use that. And yeah, also I was thinking about, like, I had another character in my experiments. Let me show you real quick. So what's interesting, I spent these 2 weeks trying really hard to make 3D Coat work, which is an amazing, huge app for sculpting originally, and it has a whole bunch of stuff in terms of modeling. You can remesh, you can, you know, project textures, work with everything really fast. It's a lot faster at sculpting, at vertex painting, and, you know, processing huge resolutions of textures and stuff like that. So better than Blender in that regard, more powerful specifically. It's faster and more like crashes less when the amount of polygons and textures is really high. So I thought I really wanted to make it work because I really wanted to paint in vertex paint, and that's really almost off limits in Blender. And this was exported from 3D Coat, and I ended up not using it because one of my main sell points on 3D Coat was that it has its own quad remesher. Well, not literally that plugin, but it also does good topology. But I ended up noticing that whenever I export to, like, Unreal Engine 5, which is actually a button, they have a button export to Unreal Engine 5, it just does this. So this is an example of just fully decimated character, fully decimated sculpt used as a character. And if you look at, like, elbows, for instance, and how textures are doing some weird stuff in there, especially I love the example of a shoulder right here. You can see this weird spike. You can't fix this by, like, changing weights or how things bend with bones. Nothing will fix this. This is just because the topology is just so not fit for bending or stretching in that direction. And generally, like, pretty much everywhere on all the bending parts, like elbows and knees, things just go really weird. If it would be perfect loops, it would be a nice fold. But in here, look at that, like, this is the worst. This is looking really bad. Like, maybe for a very distant, super low poly version, that's just, you know, all you need is for it to be there, kind of with textures, but taking as little polygons as possible, just for performance, then it would be fine. But when it's such a dense topology, this is not working. This is why you need good quad topology with proper loops for animation, because things just don't bend well if it's a bunch of random triangles. But you can see, which is, I'm continuing my point about combining different types of retopology in one character. So what this model has really well done is the spikes on the back. They're pretty much identical to the way I sculpted them. Well, maybe a bit more roundy, kinda. But generally, this is looking pretty cool, and I think seeing this kind of spikes in the game, it would look pretty awesome. I mean, again, this is a one-day designs and everything, this is all super messy, but generally, you know, as a proof of concept. This is looking pretty cool. And this is where exactly the triangulation decimation thing works really well. If I would remesh it using quad remesher, it would just smooth it all out, creating a couple of like cool loops, kind of somewhere, little hints, and that's it. It wouldn't be able to repeat this whole stuff at all. It doesn't have a flow. And quad remesher looks for a flow, because that's why you bend knees and elbows well, because of the flow. Also, his head looks a lot like a penis, I'm aware of that. But yeah, the idea that visited me is that generally remeshing the whole character with quad remesher, then making another version decimated, and then using the best of both worlds, getting all the loops and nice quads from most of the shape, but then where it's complex and doesn't really have a flow, that's where you switch to decimation, and just, you know, on the edges you would stitch it together. Would take some time, but it would probably look pretty cool. And maybe this is not the best example, maybe this is just the way to go with it, but in here, with this back like this, where, you know, you really need this super sharp, very detailed, spiky silhouette, so it can't be normals. It has to be actual geometry. I think decimation here would look really cool. So yeah, after the retopology was done, I moved on to baking normals, because you need to adapt your sculpt to this low poly mesh. You need to keep all those details from the detailed sculpt on your low poly mesh. That was the plugin called JBake. This one is a free plugin. And I mean, understandably, because pretty much all it does is just puts a bunch of functions in one place. It's just easier to use, cleaner. You don't have to remember to do certain things. It'll do it automatically. It creates the texture on its own. So really nice in that regard. It just, you click a button, like you select the low poly mesh, the high poly mesh, define the resolution of the texture you want, and maybe like the amount of search, but like you should put in like 0.005 for starters, and give it a try. You click a button, it bakes, and then you just decide whether everything's okay or not. If not, maybe search this number a little bit, and that's it. The thing is done. It's so fast, you never forget anything, everything is done just right, because this plugin takes care of that. So that's a real cool little free addition to the pipeline. Now, after that, I start actually texturing, if I am not forgetting any. Oh, UVs. You always forget UVs. Before baking, always you press Bake Maps button, and then it says you forgot something. And that's because you need to do this stuff. And honestly, so far, kind of no luck in terms of making this thing fully automatic the way I did with the topology, for instance. And this is like the worst. This is the most meaningless thing, I think. It's so stupid. I feel like UVs in general are kind of like a temporary mistake. It's something that has to go first. Oh, like completely away from all the creation process in 3D graphics. But so far I had to go through and define the, you know, these edges by just walking around and selecting some kind of loops, selecting things and marking them as seams, and then you press unwrap, it makes this thing. What I learned, or what I structurized in my head, when you talk about like UVs and what you should be looking for when you want to streamline it, you know, simplify it, look for certain plugins, some kind of help. UV map development is made of 3 stages: seams, unwrapping, and packing. And for each of these stages, there should be like 3 different plugins pretty much. Some of them may take care of everything, but usually those are like separate programs. but generally I need a really good reason to, export the model to a different app and then bring it back. It needs to do a lot of things for that. So for instance, when I was thinking about using 3D Coat, that would mean I would start the model in 3D Coat, I would model it, I would texture it, I would remesh it there and bake all the textures, and then I would export it to Blender, and that's where I would rig it and animate it. And from there, I would move it to Unreal Engine. So there's 3 apps now instead of 2. 3D Coat, then Blender, and then Unreal Engine. And that's a big investment of time, but if 3D Coat would have been worth it for me personally, I would do it, because that's a huge chunk of work done maybe a lot better, and then it would be worth, actually splitting the process in separate apps. But generally in 3D, I think it's a good idea to try and avoid that as much as possible. For only very specific things, you can do it. Like for instance, if you get a fully finished model, like full geometry, full textures ready, that's a good moment to export, But if you have a mesh and you just need UVs, and for that you export and then import back, problems with scales, problems with reading, like smoothing groups or some weird stuff like that, the character is now rotated differently or whatever. There's so many issues usually when you switch between different apps. Like, no way, I'm not doing that, if it's if there's no good seam definition, I'll probably go ahead and do it myself, And almost kind of a good idea to go with it yourself, because it kind of is a good part of the strategy, but so is retopology. But honestly, the way Quad Remesher does it, I'm totally fine with it with my strategy. Like, this is the part where, time is more important, I think, than the absence of seams somewhere when you create a texture, which I'll talk about, like how I avoided some visible seams in my texturing later. But yeah, the seams part, it seems to be like one thing that I can't find a plugin for it. Like a bunch of really powerful and a lot of the times really expensive plugins for Blender, but they're just like really good and comfortable tools for those who wanna make seams themselves, like still manually. It's not an automated tool. So that's a bummer, and I had to do it on my own. That's probably one thing that's like completely not automated so far in my process. But there's that. I defined some kind of seams. Then I did the unwrapping stage, and turns out that Blender actually has a pretty good unwrapper, generally unwrapping algorithm. So grabbing the head within its orange seams. So it grabs like the head, cuts it open like this as I defined it, and then it tries to position it all on a flat surface like this. That's what specifically unwrapping means. And find the best way with the least amount of stretching and the best representation, like so all the polygons would be of the same scale, the way they are on the actual model and everything. So that's an important part, and Blender actually does it really well. So that was awesome, and I don't need a plugin for unwrapping. So that's good to know. And then the last stage is packing, and for that I got a plugin, which is surprisingly totally free, made by a company that actually makes Unrella, if I'm not wrong. And that's a plugin for Maya and 3D Studio Max, a really cool plugin for fully unwrapping the model, I think with automatic seams as well, but that stuff is like really expensive. It's like for the Hollywood visual effects and everything, like it's a really cool famous plugin, so I can't afford that. And again, there's no plugin for Blender. But this packing thing is free, and it's kind of like, I almost don't care, like the way Blender does it is almost fine to me, but this thing is actually worth it, especially considering it's free. Like, the way it packs things is actually pretty efficient, like I like it. I'm not sure why I'm seeing so much free space in here. I'm not sure it was like that originally. If it was, it's kind of a dumb thing to do. Yep, a bunch of empty space at the top. Well, I guess it was the best thing it could do. But I don't know, like it still looked much better than the default packing by Blender. And overall, the way it, you know, put these complex shapes together, it seemed pretty efficient to me. Also, you can like restrict it to not rotate the, you know, if you want the face being vertical, it would stay vertical and stuff like that. You know, there's some features in here, so that's really cool. So generally, that's a bit of an improvement on the last part of the process. So one thing that's missing in here is defining seams. That's one thing that's really like would be great to have automated, but alas, it's not. Now, after defining seams, then we bake normals, and then we start thinking about how to texture the whole thing. And that was the part where I learned a whole lot about texturing. First of all, this was the first time where I really embraced the idea of using texture paint mode instead of vertex paint. I really like vertex paint, and I generally never liked texture paint mode. And the reason, like the main difference, to quickly illustrate why. So here I am in vertex paint mode. It can be like pretty looking or whatever, but it doesn't matter. The point is, if I paint the arm like this, like I'm painting around, right? It needs a lot of vertices, but you can subdivide for that and that'll do it. It's not a problem. But like when I paint on the edge, you can see it, like it projects normally the way you would expect painting on a surface work, right? If you're aiming the center of your brush on the arm, it just paints on the arm, kind of like painting from here, like vertically landing paint onto the surface. But if I switch to texture painting, so now I'm exactly there, and I would try to paint something like this, you see it just goes right through and hitting whatever is behind your circle, because it can't project in 3 dimensions, like changing the vector of projection. It just does it from the screen. And this is all you'll see after that. That's why I mentioned that this may have been my own mistake when texturing, because this is the kind of stuff that happens sometimes. Somewhere I accidentally like made a spot when I was texturing, like maybe a foot, you know, I was texturing and there it is, the shadow from the foot on the arm. So that's like a nightmare. The first time I learned about this, many years ago, I immediately realized, okay, then I will only be ever texturizing in ZBrush, I guess, because that's where really fast and good vertex painting is. And in Blender, it's a problem because if, as I mentioned, you need to subdivide to have a lot of vertices. So the painting would be detailed and not like blocky like this. This is just because this is literally the polygons you paint on. If you subdivide into a lot of polygons, it just starts lagging very strongly. Like it's crazy how laggy it is. So Blender is like really bad with that part specifically. It's not very fast with sculpting in general, like hundreds of millions of polygons that can't really handle the way like ZBrush or 3D Code do it. But that's not that critical to me. Like this model I did with no issues whatsoever. I don't know how many polygons it was, probably mostly due to din topo, just creating more polygons exactly where you need them, and that's it. So that saves a lot of performance there. But vertex paint is off limits pretty much, just for painting some masks, and that's it. But overall you have to paint with this tool. And generally, most of the industry does it exactly like that, which is interesting. So I decided to, you know, embrace it and give it a good try. What if I actually can do it? And turns out I totally can. And it actually has quite a few really cool benefits that are absolutely impossible in Vertex Paint. First of all, in Vertex Paint, you just paint one map at a time and that's it. It's impossible to paint several of them or anything like that. I don't think you can even use Eevee. Well, yeah, you can use Eevee, but you have to specifically connect Vertex Color node to the color section, and only then you will be seeing it, probably. Or maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe you can actually easily arrange things to use Vertex Paint for a bunch of stuff, but projecting a lot of textures, and like you still, if you want to use photo textures, you will still need texture projection, not vertex projection. And I think a lot of stuff is just incompatible in that regard with Vertex Paint. Anyway, when I decided to go with this, I stumbled upon another really cool plugin, and it's called PBR Painter. I think it's $40, so it's the second most expensive plugin I bought so far. I think the most expensive one is the Outrage Pro. The most expensive one would be Quad Remesher if I would actually buy it, but I probably will. If we consider Quad Remesher purchased, then PBR Painter is the third most expensive one. So $40, and this thing does kind of like magic to the way Blender works with textures, because Blender works with textures very simply. Like, you kind of work on one texture at a time, and that's kind of about it. And this is the kind of stuff this plugin creates. So it's a complex structure of nodes, and it takes care of it automatically all the time, while you never even look here. You just work with the interface. You create layers. So I can create like a new layer right now, define its resolution, you know, tell it's multi-channel. Let's call it, I don't know, blood. So this is the new thing. You see a new violet giant node, that's a new layer. And now I'll define, like, I want the base color, and I don't want to paint in it. I want it to be just consistently like bloody color. And that's it, that's all I'll do here. Then I know I need it to be very, not matte, but very shiny. So that's very low roughness. Let's go 0, literally. Then normals, I want them to stick out a little bit. So let's make a brush stroke to see what I'm talking about. So now I paint color and roughness at the same time. And also I can introduce consistent bump. Now, this is something you can't simply do in Blender. It's kind of almost not something Blender does. And this is so awesome, the fact that you can actually pull it off like this. And what's really cool, it's actually fully featured. For instance, right now, if I cover all these details like this, you see it sort of removes all the geometry bumps underneath, but you can press combine normals, and now all the details from underneath still show through. So that's really awesome. Then of course we can make the blood maybe work in multiply mode actually. Maybe it's a good idea. I'm not sure. It should be much brighter for that. Yeah, that looks reasonable, right? This is the way blood looks. So something dark underneath blood will remain dark. That's really awesome. I actually didn't do it before with this procedural texture over there. But yeah, you go ahead and paint like this. You can create brushes in here and everything. So you go into tool. I have like a skin brush, spots brush. Yeah, by the way, skin brush. This is a skin brush. I'm projecting a texture right now, actually. But for that, I need to be painting. Like, it's a brush that has a legit texture of the skin inside of it. Like, you paint not with a flat color. Like, this is a texture mask, the actual shape of it, right? The one that we see. But if I would be actually painting with colors, not with the constant layer, but with its own colors, if I choose just white and here, it would be actually painting with this photo texture of the skin. So all of this texture was painted with this kind of brush, only not in the blood mode. So that's pretty awesome. Honestly, I would love to have remove combine normals and just there's transparency, right? Like opacity of it. Like, I want some details to show through, but generally, you know, the blood is thick. It should remove some of the details underneath a little bit, but it's a shame it can't like blur details underneath it. It can only like reveal them a little bit, but I mean, it's something, I guess. Still not exactly what it should be. Maybe it's best to stick to what it is already. So yeah, this is the kind of stuff that made me really excited about the whole process. I ended up using like about 6 or maybe 7 layers. It got pretty laggy in the end because it's 8 layers, each one of them has like at least 3 textures plus several masks, which is a separate thing that each layer can have. So right here I would add, let's say, a procedural texture, for instance, right? That would make it masked out by a noise, which is pretty cool as well, and very useful if used correctly, of course. So yeah, this kind of stuff. You have this kind of mask. You define its, you know, its scale, its details, something like this for the liquid, I guess. Roughness is also some kind of detail. Distortion, like actually liquid stuff a little bit, may actually totally work for, you know, for blood spots. And that sort of masks out whatever you paint. And now you get a much more complex look of your things. And maybe not exactly like fully removing, like mostly you want to define the shapes of the spots with your brush, but inside of it there will be this complex noise that may be combined with other stuff, like with the cavity mask or ambient occlusion mask. So that stuff is present in here as well. You can combine with other things like geometric, or even like ambient occlusion uses cycles to simulate that like cavity map. But this stuff is a bit harder to take control of, I would say. Like pretty much it means it would be more visible in the armpits, in the any kind of cavities, but on the surface, on the very bumps, it would be less visible. So it's like getting inside of cavities and drying out in there. So you don't even have to really think about a lot of stuff. You just cover the whole surface and it kind of gets inside of those details on its own. So all of this is right here, just without leaving Blender at all, which is really, really cool. And then of course you can just merge all the layers, bake them, and export. Actually, it's right here. I just realized you can actually do that with masks. That's really awesome. So yeah, you just bake and you get just 3 textures that are totally ready to be exported to Unreal Engine. And after that is done, we have our remeshed, UV unwrapped, texturized model with all the materials defined. Also, I found a few really cool websites with a lot of free like textures, materials, and even like HDR stuff. So this one is called Ambient CG. So what's really cool about it, it's not just free, it's public domain materials and physically based rendering for physically based. So PBR, exactly what I'm using here. So it says like CC0 Creative Commons 0, which means any project, like for an indie game developer, exactly what you want to hear. Like you can use any of these textures and you don't owe anyone anything. You can do anything you want. That's really amazing to have this kind of library. Of course, I also, like, because I'm making the game for Unreal Engine, I have the whole Megascans and like Quixel material library, which is a really awesome thing. But having more resources like that is really awesome, so all the Unreal Engine games wouldn't look the same. So yeah, this fun looking texture is exactly from that website. Let me have a look at the actual rigged model. Yeah, I feel like it looks a bit different now. I think because bumps kind of baked differently on the arms, but I think on the feet, they still look the way I was working with them. So I feel like I made some kind of mistake somewhere with adding some kind of bump mapping somewhere where I shouldn't have added that. Like, yeah, this is the way this material looks like. And yeah, the seams, something I was talking about. So why I don't think you need to worry too much about seams. First of all, because you paint on the model, you don't really, you know, paint here. Although sometimes it's very useful, especially because of the whole projection shadowing issue that I mentioned before, that you have that going on, right? You sometimes try to use this map because there nothing overlaps, and that's a way to go sometimes. You don't have to care about UVs if you paint here, but the problem is sometimes if you project some kind of photo texture like this, that photo texture is projected in a flat way. You only define the mask for it, and therefore this kind of seams will appear. So what I ended up doing was actually pretty cool, and I only like just stumbled upon that feature in that same PBR Painter add-on. I think I still have all the layers available here. Yeah, there they are. So let it load in real quick. Hopefully I'll have enough memory to hold all of this plus Unreal Engine open. But yeah, and now as you can see, the model is a lot heavier to render and move around, especially when it takes a lot of pixels on the screen. So yeah, working with too much layers is pretty heavy, but I ended up being able to do all of this like this. But again, at any point you can merge all the layers and start working fast again. But in here, I just wanna go in right here and show you guys the way I solved the issue with the seams. So I had a whole bunch of seams on feet and hands because I had this photo texture. So it looked like this, I suppose. Having a hard time finding any seams though. Where here's one, that's for sure, and here's another one going right here. This is how I defined seams in my UV map. And that's exactly where they all don't stick together properly. And you can't fix that in this layer because you only define, you know, whether there is black goop or not. So you can either add it or remove it, and what the texture looks like inside of it, you don't control because it's just a photo material and that's it. So what I found is that in texture mapping in this plugin, there's mapping type and there's UV and box. UV means it uses your UV map, and box means it would project from left, right, up, down, front, and back. So still creating a whole bunch of seams, but differently. Like it will be on the, specifically from this side, and here's the seams between these sides. All four sides and up and down. And this is what the seams would look like. And you would think like, what's the benefit in that then? Well, the benefit is that these are the different seams. What I did was I duplicated the layer with the black mud and I erased it completely, so it didn't exist at all. Like all the painting of it I removed, and then I changed to the box projection method. And then I just started painting over just the seams, because the seams in the UV are not the same in the same places where the seams of box projection is. And that means I can just carefully paint over these and they'll just be gone. And that's it. That's how you solve it. That's so cool. I had no idea I could just take advantage of using, you know, two different projection methods and that's it. So that was really cool, a cool discovery. And yeah, after you texturize everything, you pretty much bake the textures, which means you export them in separate 3 images. And after that, you just have your simple material and just these 3 exported textures connected, just the way they will be in your game engine or whatever. And it works really fast now, so nothing is lagging anymore or anything, because it's just one set of textures and that's it. Now it's time to rig the thing. So this is my favorite part to show to everybody because it's just so cool. This plugin is absolutely mind-blowing. And as I said, this is called Auto Rig Pro. It's the second most expensive one, but it is absolutely so worth it. So here we have our character that's not rigged or anything. Nothing done at all. No bones, no work at all. Just a model with topology, UVs, and all 3 textures connected. That's it. It's just a static mesh. So one thing you need to do is to make sure that your model is actually in the center. So do that. I'll hide our rigged one. So you hit in the smart section, you hit get selected objects. Now you press add neck. That's where the neck starts. Then you hit add chin. That's where the chin is. Shoulders, wrists, spine root, which is butt, and ankles, which is probably right here. And that's it. We define how many fingers. Our model has 5 fingers. Spine count. This thing you don't have to touch if you don't know what it is. Facial setup. If you want to have animation, you click on this and then you define the edges of the lips and where the eyeballs are. A bit more work to do, but generally I will only be using this for monsters probably, so I'll never get to really use it. Mirror is important, so if our pose is symmetrical, which is most likely is, and highly recommended to be. So we just press go after defining these basic places, and boom, here's the skeleton already. So now we just maybe fix something a little bit if we really feel like it, just making sure that the bones are actually in the middle of the bending parts And this, I prefer being like that, probably. Check the fingers. They look pretty much flawless to me. And yeah, the biggest challenge with my designs is usually the head, because I tend to do something with the neck, and that's usually the most complex part. I would maybe go like this in here. And yeah, pretty much after that, you press match to rig, it creates all of these controllers. Then you press bind by selecting the mesh and this rig, and it just, that's it, you're done. It's already bending and everything. You get that. After that, you can also create, I remember somewhere in here, there's a button, maybe in Mist? Yeah. Set picker cam, so it creates this kind of thing. It actually exists very low over there. There's a camera pointing in this plane, and this is the plane. On this plane there are all of these controllers, so you go ahead and use it, no problem. So yeah, really cool. In terms of full character creation, the very start to very finish with the full rig, it's done. It's really done. It can be easily exported to Unreal Engine now. Let me actually maybe give it a real quick try. So we put this in Mesh. This is, by the way, another plugin, a free plugin made by Unreal Engine developers themselves, Epic Games. It's called Blender to Unreal, something like that. And pretty much you just press send to Unreal button or Control U, I mapped it like that. And it will send all the meshes from the mesh collection, all the rigs from rig collection, straight to Unreal, and that's it. You don't have to do anything. Like, all the textures will follow and everything. So skeletal mesh, there's the guy. Oh yeah, that's right. That's not actually the way I exported the thing is, the auto control rig thing. Like, I already exported this guy before. Thing is, you should better do that differently using the exporting inside of this plugin. Right here, it actually has a bunch of stuff in terms of, like, you can select Unreal Engine specifically and telling it to rename it as humanoid rig, so it will just immediately retarget easily. So it takes care of a lot of stuff like that. It's even better than exporting using this basic plugin. I forgot about that. So this is the way you do it. It cleans up the control rig from all these extra bones and everything, so it will be just working just fine. So if I play, by the way, you can see this guy is from one of my experiments in 3D code. Obviously, it's also made of copper, so that was my thing. Oh no, I dyed it. But yeah, the thing totally works, and this guy was imported with no issues whatsoever, but you gotta know what to use to export. And I guess the basic exporter by Epic Games is not the best way to do it, since there's a lot of extra controls in this very sophisticated rig right here. Not all of it should be transferred to Unreal, obviously. Only actual body bones should be here, and that's it. Oh yeah, the texture is here, pretty sharp. So yeah, I guess this video will be mostly about all this stuff, and I wanted to like address a little bit the things you guys had a lot of problems with in the previous video. So the previous video was called Why I Think Digital Art is Dead, or Why Digital Art is Not Art. And generally I thought I made the video in the context of, you know, being open-minded and just sharing my thoughts and asking what you guys think, but many of you guys took it very personally, apparently, and a lot of people got upset with it. Like, not all of it. To give you guys some insight, about 70% people upvoted the video, so most of you guys agreed with me, I guess. But generally, yeah, obviously a pretty controversial topic. I get about 50-50 comments, people totally agreeing with me or totally disagreeing with me, which is very interesting. Overall, like, I don't feel like I said anything wrong. I think I brought up a pretty interesting topic, so it's an interesting thing to discuss. But I do think, like, number one, I should say that one thing I said the wrong way. I'm sorry, guys, for using the word art just my own way. And that was the main mistake. I feel like most comments seem to be about the word, like the problem with the word usually. The fact that I specifically said that it's not art. And that's where, like, I apologize, because I kind of used this word like I own it. So I redefined it and just went with it like everyone's gonna be fine with it. Like everyone agreed that, yeah, we're totally using art exactly this way now. So yeah, that was a big error of mine, and I think that made the biggest problem for most people. When I was explaining myself in the comments, I came up with the word influence. It's like digital art is not influential in modern world. And I guess that's something I can stick to now, because really the word art is too broad and weird. Like in modern vocabulary, like a person like a director of a movie that comes up with an idea, you know, also a screenwriter, someone who creates the idea from its inception and develops it completely, really coming up with something that never was done before. Even though it may be a production thing, like in a business, maybe not, it doesn't matter. The thing is, they create something really conceptually new. It's a real work where you create something that never happened before, and it's fully your idea. You don't just do what you've been told. What do you call that? If you already call, for instance, texturing a game model, it's also called art. We definitely need a new word for either this or this. That's why I defined like art direction type of work as art and execution type of work as craft. Which is not correct, this is just my invention. I just decided to go this way, and people don't agree, I understand. After all, we call all of this art, right? Art is, visual arts are just called arts usually. So it's not really fair. That's the problem. The word art is so broad, and it's hard to discuss the subject. It immediately turned into a holy war, pretty much. That's what happened in the comment section, because people just don't agree on the definition of the word. And I'm trying to discuss a specific narrow aspect of it, and it's really hard to do because I can't tell you guys with one word what I'm talking about. But let me explain why I decided to talk about it at all. I mentioned it in the previous video, but it was a brief mentioning. It started with the video I did about 6 months ago about the whole thing that AI will take over people's jobs. And that video was called "Artists Shouldn't Fear AI and Companies Should." And I mentioned all of this in the previous video again, but I mentioned that people will, like artists will stop being artists and become art directors. We'll just be using AI as much higher level tools to create something much more complex. And most of you guys were upset that maybe you don't want to be doing that. You want to keep being a simple artist. Like, you know, you don't want to create games and worlds and animations and stories. You want to create visual stuff, and that's it. You want to keep doing that work. And by the way, I'm only talking about profession of an artist, because if you're doing it as a hobby just for yourself, just go ahead, I have no problems with you whatsoever, and you should have no problems with me as well. I talk about people who want to do this and only this, meaning this will be your profession, your life. You dedicate yourself to it completely. You become an artist completely. That's just what you are. And that inevitably means this is your work as well, because you have to live off of it as well. And while many of you guys rushed immediately to throw the favorite expression of all, that art is not defined by its monetary value and everything, trust me, I'm aware of that. I never talked about that at all. As I said, I was talking about the influence of art. It's just that people generally don't care about paintings. But most importantly, with the connection with AI, and that people don't really want to change, they want to keep being, you know, execution artists, as I would call it this way now. That's the part of the problem, and that's why I decided to differentiate between art directors and execution artists, because execution artists will soon disappear at all. And that's the main premise to the whole discussion, that if you're doing that, you don't come up with your own ideas, you don't start the project, and you just do what you've been told. Soon, an AI-powered program will be doing that, and that's it. So this whole thing is a discussion about the profession of an artist. and how this profession, specifically a digital artist profession, it gives me a hard time finding where it can be truly start to finish a standalone project that could be influential in the world and let you be just this kind of digital artist professionally and generally in the world, meaning just being a digital artist, not as a hobbyist, but all together. It's hard now. People maybe swipe through some digital art, but you know it's not the same. It's just not the same thing. Digital art is the execution work, not the actual creation work. I don't want to argue with anyone. I'm just trying to express my idea as precisely as possible that this is an issue of generally feeling as a true creator of your own ideas and how you can really exist as a creator professionally and your whole life. And secondly, the threat of AI taking over the profession because it doesn't really create anything from start to finish. So yeah, that's something I wanted specifically to highlight in this video, is that it's best to understand what I mean by connecting it to the AI idea. That part of digital art that's gonna die because of AI is exactly what I call craft. Even though you can call it art if you will. There's just not enough words that I know of, at least, to define the difference. But the problem of AI helps me with that. So I hope that's clear, and that's what I wanted to specify today a little bit. So yeah, I guess that'll be it. Having a lot of fun, having a lot of progress with defining everything. Almost done with the script, the story for the game of in terms of the specifically defined level for the demo. So hopefully very soon I'll legit start working on concept art and modeling the characters like this for the actual demo. So that'll probably start in 2 weeks or something, because the next week will be the Overpaint week. And you guys sent a huge amount of submissions to me, which I didn't expect after the previous video. I have 10 submissions, and I think it will definitely be at least 2 videos. So yeah, look forward to a lot of Overpaint in the nearest future, and right after that, we'll start with working on the game. There's still a lot more issues to resolve, mostly in terms of animation. Like the basic gameplay animation I know how to work with, but motion capture, there's a lot of heavy and expensive decisions to make about that. But we'll talk about it later. For now, this is it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Why do you look so metallic? Do you look like that next to the bright orange table? No, you don't. You look much nicer here. Much better.